people derive a significant dimension of their sense of well-being, their sense of self-worth from the stature and respect that they see their group to be accorded. And when their personal economic circumstances were collapsing, at the same time that the country that they identified with had been brought to its knees and humiliated, and then they saw this small, narrow class of new private sector elites stealing the state. And it created a tremendous backlash and a desire for a strong man that would, I choose my words very carefully here, make Russia great again.
Mr. Putin?
Trump impersonators are everywhere in Russia.
Я люблю Россию, но ты ничего не докажешь.
You're fired, you're fired, you're fired.
But it could be an American TV program that best describes the Putin-Trump relationship.
I think Putin views Trump as an apprentice.
Donald Trump wins the presidency.
But when the United States elected a new president, it looked like Russia had fallen for a new leader.
Победа Трампа будет праздник для всего человечества.
There were toasts all over Moscow,
За победу Дональда Трампа.
at the parliament known as the Duma, on talk shows, and at bars. But one man seemed utterly unsurprised by Trump's victory.
Putin just outplays him, said a high-level administration official, comparing the Russian leader to a chess grandmaster and Trump to an occasional player of checkers, unquote. As CNN's Matthew Chance reports for us now, Trump may also be helping Putin consolidate power for years to come.
In 2019, President Trump announced the sudden pullout of US forces from Syria, abandoning Kurdish allies, allowing Russian forces to take over deserted US bases, filling the vacuum and a long-standing Kremlin goal. But in other conflicts, like Ukraine, Trump also played well to the Russian audience. Threats to suspend vital military aid fueled bitter impeachment hearings in Washington. It was music to the Kremlin's ears.
Breaking news overnight, President Trump personally ordered the suspension of hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine just days before he encouraged their president to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden.
Then he went on, it's just a continuation of the 2016 election that the Democrats are trying to refight, and now they're trying to pressure Trump through Ukraine. And Putin said the charges that he improperly stopped military aid are dreamed up.
So how do you reconcile that the Ukrainians were being told they needed to announce these investigations publicly if they wanted that aid, one day after President Trump told you strongly that that was not the case?
And my main point was I was trying to get him to give me the clearance to tell President Zelensky that the aid was going to be provided. And so when I asked him that, he was, again, very consistent. He said, Ron, you know what a corrupt place it is. And besides, Ron, why isn't Europe stepping up to the plate? I talked to Angela Merkel.
The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development says that the EU contributed $425.2 million on average for 2016-2017. The U.S. was second with $204 million. Again, I'm not fact-checking you. The president's impression is incorrect. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm the one that raised the issue from my phone call with Gordon Sondland the day before, where he described some type of something that Ukraine had to do before President Trump would release the funding. And when I brought up that scenario, President Trump immediately, and I've described as adamantly and vehemently denied it.
Donald John Trump withheld hundreds of millions of dollars to an ally at war and a coveted White House meeting with their president to coerce or extort that nation's help to cheat in our elections. And when he was found out, he engaged in the most comprehensive effort to cover up his misconduct in the history of presidential impeachment.
Did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
Oh, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here. And they expect to do it during the next campaign.
The United States in 2016 was not the first target of Russian election interference, and it will not be the last. The German Marshall Fund has identified Russian efforts to undermine some 25 democracies since 2004, including the Baltic states and most other European Union countries, as well as Georgia and Ukraine. Building on Soviet-era tactics of subversion and disinformation, a Senate report also finds these operations have spread money, lies, propaganda, and various tools of harder power to aid those sympathetic to Moscow and damage its critics, as well as the NATO alliance and democracy itself.
Well, my next guest has himself been a target, having been poisoned twice, once back in 2015, again in 2017. He writes in a Washington Post op-ed that it's imperative for the world to take notice and take action against these political assassination attempts and to speak out, saying, quote, "It is much easier to commit a crime in silence than in the spotlight." Vladimir, you write in the Washington Post this week, the official diagnosis in your poisonings from the hospital was toxic action by unidentified substance, meaning in plain language, poisoning by an unknown source. Multiple organ failure, brain swelling, and a prolonged coma follows. Sounds very familiar. Both times, doctors told my wife I had about a 5% chance to live. So the good news is that with Navalny now in a German hospital where the German doctors seem to think he was poisoned, there is some chance he may be able to recover. You, of course, were treated in Russia, and they did save your life.
They did, and I'm going to be eternally grateful to that I did make those 5%. But you're absolutely right in what you said a few minutes ago, that poison really has been a preferred, a favorite tool of security services back since Soviet days, but this practice has really proliferated since Vladimir Putin came to power. And there's a long and growing list of political opponents, independent journalists, foreigners they don't like, those they perceive as traitors, who have encountered these mishaps or accidents or poisonings. And some have been fortunate enough to survive, as I was, and as I hope to God Alexei Navalny will be. Others were less fortunate. Yuri Shakachikhin, an investigative journalist and opposition lawmaker, died a horrible death in Moscow in 2003 from what certainly was deliberate poisoning. But, this is a method that's designed, I think, to give the Kremlin plausible deniability. Because every time something like this happens, Kremlin spokespeople shrug their shoulders and say, how do we know it's poisoning? Where is your proof?
The unifying thread in all this is Russia's assault on truth itself, on the very notion that there can be an objective, verifiable set of facts. Kremlin disinformation operations do not need to, and do not really aim to, persuade democratic publics that Russia's positions are right, only that a democracy's government and political leaders cannot be believed or trusted. As John Lansing, the CEO of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, put it, if everything is a lie, then the biggest liar wins.
When he was investigated, he did everything he could to obstruct justice, going so far as to fire the FBI director and try to fire the special counsel, and ask the White House counsel to lie on his behalf. During the same campaign, while telling the country he had no business dealings with Russia, he was continuing to actively pursue the most lucrative deal of his life, a Trump Tower in the heart of Moscow.
And I want to use this opportunity to thank everybody on both sides of the Atlantic, and that includes congressional leaders in the United States on both sides of the political aisle, Democrats and Republicans, who have spoken out in the last several days. And I think this international spotlight is a major reason why Alexei Navalny is in safe hands now. I know in my case, international spotlight was very important. And, when the late Senator John McCain took to the Senate floor to speak about my case when I was lying in a coma in a Moscow hospital, I think it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he's one of those people to whom I owe my life. So this spotlight was very important. As to silence from the White House, there is a historical term for this kind of policy, and that historical term is appeasement. And history has taught us, I think, without any doubt, that appeasing dictators simply does not work. The only effect, the only result of appeasement is emboldening dictators and making their excesses and their abuses even worse. I think it is very important that there should be no more talk of resets, no more talk of any kind of overtures or invitations to summits or any kind of other appeasement tactics towards a regime that speaks with its political opponents in the language of poisons and bullets.
6 close associates of the president would be indicted or go to jail in connection with the president's campaign, Russia and the effort to cover it up. On the day after that tragic chapter appeared to come to an end with Bob Mueller's testimony, Donald Trump was back on the phone, this time with another foreign power, Ukraine, and once again seeking foreign help with his election. Only this time, he had the full powers of the presidency at his disposal. This time, he could use coercion. This time, he could withhold aid from a nation whose soldiers were dying every week.
To make American democracy great again, we must forthrightly confront, across party and ideological lines, the assaults on truth, science, the news media, the judicial system, immigrants, minorities, the civil service, and our democratic allies that President Donald Trump has deliberately unleashed.
There's a great conflict of interest. To ask men holding office.
We need to change the method we use to elect public officials so that we provide voters with more choice and give politicians more incentives.
Let a bipartisan group do it.
For moderation, civility, and compromise. Under ranked choice voting, people do not just vote for their first choice for an office. Instead, they rank the candidates in order of their preference. If no candidate wins an outright majority, the candidate with the lowest number of first-place votes is eliminated, and the second preference votes of his or her supporters are redistributed to the remaining candidates. The process continues until someone wins a majority. It is an elegant, deeply democratic idea. Votes aren't wasted. If a voter's favorite candidate falls short, her vote is transferred to her next choice down the line. Voters can weigh the merits of several candidates, and candidates have to appeal for the second or third preference votes of their rivals' supporters. The logic is compelling. By removing the specter of wasted votes, ranked choice voting makes it easier for independents in the creative center of American politics to run.
We also see more women and people of color getting elected into office with ranked choice voting across the 4 Bay Area cities that use it.
All of this is likely to make elections fairer, more competitive, more interesting, and yet more encouraging of moderation.
History will not be kind to Donald Trump. I think we all know that. Not because it will be written by never-Trumpers, but because whenever we have departed from the values of our nation, we have come to regret it, and that regret is written all over the pages of our history. If you find that the House has proved its case and still vote to acquit, your name will be tied to his with a cord of steel and for all of history.
Thank you, Mr. President.
But if you find the courage to stand up to him, to speak the awful truth to his rank falsehood, your place will be among the Davids who took on Goliath. If only you will say enough.
We have been stuck with the anachronism of the Electoral College and all the tortured arguments in its defense for far too long. The United States is less democratic today because of a system that America's founders jury-rigged in part to square the needs of democracy with the demography of slavery.
The 40% of Virginia who are slaves, the 50 to 55% of South Carolina who are slaves, the 30% of North Carolina who are slaves. The problem is this: slaves aren't voting. And here's the crux of the matter for modern Americans. The reason we have the Electoral College is because of slavery. It is the last legacy, the last vestige of slavery in the U.S. Constitution that is still affecting our political lives.
The most obvious way to get rid of the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment, a far-fetched prospect in this era of polarization. But there is a promising shortcut: the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. By this ingenious initiative, 11 states, including populous New York and California, and the District of Columbia, have adopted a bill requiring that their electoral votes be cast for the winner of the national popular vote. The bill only takes effect once the states that have passed it account for at least 270 electoral votes, a majority. While this admirable initiative will probably not prevail in time for the 2020 election, it could get to 270 electoral votes in the not-too-distant future.
He has betrayed our national security, and he will do so again. He has compromised our elections, and he will do so again. You will not change him. You cannot constrain him. He is who he is. Truth matters little to him. What's right matters even less, and decency matters not at all. I do not ask you to convict him because truth or right or decency matters nothing to him, but because we have proven our case and it matters to you. Truth matters to you. Right matters to you. You are decent. He is not who you are.
We urgently need to modernize and harden our voting systems. Congress must help. Fixing our voting infrastructure goes to the heart of our democracy. It should not be a partisan issue. Donald Trump is right when he calls today's Washington a swamp. But he is now the worst creature in it, and only new rules and institutions can dry it up. The greatest system failure has been in Congress. It has failed to provide concerted moral and political pushback, especially from members of Trump's own party, who, aside from the late great John McCain and a few other honorable exceptions,
we're here to represent the people that sent us here,
have lacked the courage even to denounce Trump's degradations of democracy, let alone vote against them. If we are resolute, the time of Trump could still be followed by a new progressive era that revives the founding spirit of American democracy, a time in which ordinary people rise up to reclaim power from giant corporations, opaque special interests, and entrenched partisan oligarchies. But it's up to us.